Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. As you've seen today, we have our Director General, Yves Desbazet, so the Director General of Nucleareurope, who will provide some introductory remarks for this webinar, and that will be followed by a presentation by Myrto Tripathi, so President of Voices of Nuclear and co-author of the report. After that, there will then be a Q&A session with her colleague Benjamin Laredo, who is also co-author of this report. So please don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat during the presentation, and then we will start the discussion straight after. So Yves, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, Myrto, also for this interesting discussion or presentation you're going to provide us. I would like to also to thank all the participants today for attending this webinar. And we basically will focus on the presentation of the Terrawater energy scenario for 2050 in France, and how France can reach carbon neutrality in that horizon of time. So maybe just starting with a little bit broader perspective, European broader perspective, because I believe that many of what will be presented later for France are valid for Europe at large in general. Just a reminder of where we stand in Europe in terms of debates and the role of nuclear. First of all, you are all aware that the objective of Europe is to reach carbon neutrality in 2050. This comes with obviously a strong push on low carbon generation. And this is, I believe, one of the main objectives of the von der Leyen Commission, which is still in office today, which is the Green Deal, the so-called Green Deal, which is well known. The term is well known. I think what has changed a little bit in the very recent past is the understanding that decarbonization and environment are very important issues, but they are not the only ones. And the other aspect that also have to be taken into account are namely the question of affordability. And we've seen this with the gas prices over the last 18 months that have basically have increased by many order of magnitudes. Even if situation tends to calm down a bit today, this trend is still an important one to be borne in mind. And then the other issue, which is also very high in everybody's agenda, is a question of energy independence. I think sovereignty also has become a major mainstream matter in the debates in Brussels in particular. In that, I would say, general context, we see in many countries very positive trend, positive shift toward nuclear, and I think it is something which is important to also bear in mind. We see a growing number of member states who have now positive attitude towards nuclear. I think with different shade of positiveness, but in general we see this trend happening, and this is the growing number of member states which are in favor of nuclear is growing by days. So we have the historic one, France, Finland, and many Central Eastern countries of Europe. But we also see, for example, in countries which had very strong position against nuclear, like Denmark or Italy, this change in mind. I think it is important to also take this into account, because at the end of the day, what is important is the position of the Council in Europe in terms of influence. In this context, we also, I think this is very important also to notice this nuclear alliance, so-called nuclear alliance, which was triggered and gathered by under the initiative of the French Minister of Energy Transition, Agnès Pannier-Runacher. This club, I think, so it exists for already many years. But what is quite new is that it has become quite visible, somehow unofficial. Here, put it into bracket, but a very visible club organization alliance that now has real organization. And I would say that the last meeting of 16th of May, where Nucleareurope had an important role in preparing figures, numbers, and proposing a target, which has been adopted by these member states of the alliance. This target, which we believe is very ambitious, but is needed, is 150 gigawatt installed capacity in the EU by 2050. And this 150 gigawatt would include long-term operation, large reactor new build, SMRs, and later on AMRs. So I think this is important to have this because it's now sort of setting the objective, and we, as industry, also have to take our part in drafting and proposing a full roadmap to get to this, to get down this journey of 150 gigawatt. So we see this important political move giving some impetus in Europe for nuclear. That being said, we are not there yet totally, and we see that there are still a lot of discussion at EU level on the different aspects. We as Nucleareurope are really promoting the technology neutral approach in very different files. We see this is not yet a given of EU policies. There are a lot of debates still ongoing on the role of low-carbon hydrogen, namely hydrogen being produced by nuclear, which many countries do not consider as something that should be there. The question of net zero industrial act, with the question of how nuclear should be treated as I would say similarly as others as contributing to net zero industry objective of the EU. So we believe that in the end of the day, nuclear is needed, and it is something we are struggling for. We need to convince all the stakeholders. We know that for some of them it will be difficult in any way, but we at least need to be sure that nuclear is treated on an equal footing compared to other sources of energy. So on this, I will just stop there, and I will hand over the floor to Myrto, because I think we all are waiting for the conclusion of the report of Terrawater now. So Myrto, the floor is yours. Thank you.
And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Yves and Nucleareurope for this invitation. We're very happy to be here today. I also want to thank Benjamin, that is online as well, and can eventually put his camera on and will be assisting me in the question and answer phase. We'll be happy to answer all the questions that you may have. Is the co-author with me of the Terrawater modeling scenario. So I won't take too much time on that formal introduction and go straight to the scenario, explain you quickly what we're presenting today. What we're presenting today is one of the lead scenario that supports the French energy debate. As you may know, the French energy law and the 10-year multilateral plan will be rediscussed all over this year until vote is to take place in exactly more or less a year from now in the summer of 2024. So why is this Terrawater scenario potentially interesting to the rest of the European Union and to the rest of the member countries interested in all undergoing the same challenges and the same attempts to transform entirely their energy mix? This scenario, maybe I should also mention that the scenario that we're presenting to you today is the first time we present outside of France. It will be presented again at the end of June to the IEA during a technical session about modeling the future 250 net zero energy scenarios, and potentially we'll have occasions to present it as well in the fall, either at the Atoms for Climate conference and at the COP28, hopefully. So that being said, again, why is it potentially interesting to you? First of all, because we've wanted to organize everything that are the different energy sources that we rely on around one single major objective, which is to guarantee today the promises we were going to make to the France of tomorrow. And that starts with one essential principle, and that you'll understand is applied throughout. And maybe, Benjamin, we can go to the next slide already, which is reduce to the maximum the number of bets that we are taking. And indeed, what happened is that we realized that in the other scenarios that were used to support the energy debate in France, a certain number of bets had been made. Technological bets like heavy reliance on hydrogen and a lot of transport and storage associated with its use, for example, a lot of use of biomass, for example, sometimes beyond even the potential that the country is able to support itself, considering that some other technologies will be mature industrially and able to be deployed in a very short term, because 2050 is less than 30 years from now, as you can imagine. So we wanted to avoid the technological bets. We wanted to avoid also the behavioral societal bets. We are in the European Union all democracies, and we managed to reach these kind of societies at a cost to us. And we don't want to have to revert back on those social and democratic achievements just because we would need to constrain excessively the use of energy, which is obviously the base for everything else. Third type of bets we wanted to avoid, the geopolitical bets. I mean, I think obviously we made that scenario prior to the energy crisis and prior to the Ukrainian war, but it was a little bit of a foresight on our part, doing this because we realized that we could not have rest all our perspectives for future energy mix on an international cooperation, on the stability of the markets that we could not ensure and warranty to future generations. So we've wanted to avoid this. And how does that principle of being as realistic, as rugged as possible, being able to be as solid as we can in face of the challenges to come that will come in numbers in addition to the energy transition? Well, that translated, and Benjamin, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, that translated in this scenario that covers today metropolitan France, so outside of the Caribbean islands and all those ones that you understand are very specific energy mixes for themselves. It goes up to 2050, but what we wanted is go beyond the net zero target to actually reach a sustainable, robust electrical system that was capable of carrying us way beyond 2050. Obviously, life does not end there, and we will have to have installations and systems that are capable of going centuries and centuries to come, and that our children and grandchildren can rely on the principles we laid out. And try not to lose too much time, but part of the principles we've wanted to push forward was to get out of what we feel sometimes are very dogmatic approaches, ideological approaches to the energy mix, and try to revert back to a very technical scenario, somehow trying to find the technical optimal of what would be an energy mix in the face of environmental challenges, climate challenges, equity in the access of to energy services, and sovereignty, to be as independent as we can in our decision making from powers outside our borders. And I mean outside our European borders, most essentially. So that is because we've been looking for that technical optimal and trying to present you today that technical optimal that we think it may be interesting to the rest of the European countries that are undergoing the same kind of questioning and search for the best energy mix for themselves. So the technical optimal comes with two aspects. You're going to see the first one. It's obviously relying on a lot of baseload, sovereign, dispatchable, low carbon sources of power. Out of those, there's essentially two, which is nuclear and hydro. It is a sad day today, as we, the Korkova dam has blown up this morning, actually has broken this morning. We don't exactly know what are the reasons behind this situation, but it will be a major environmental humanitarian catastrophe. It is also very unfortunate because hydro and nuclear are the most targeted energy sources today in the debate. As you know, there's repeatedly letters from anti-nuclear, anti-hydro environmental groups that are reaching the European Union, and it is most unfortunate because, as you and us know, those are the two technically most optimal energy sources that we should be relying on for the future low carbon energy transition. The second aspect that comes with the technical optimization is electrification. So maybe that takes us to the next slide. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. And I'll go pretty fast from this point on, just to give you an idea and a couple hints and highlights of what this scenario is about, and then we can come back into more detail afterwards with the question and answers. So we wanted to be realistic in our choices of technologies, in our choice of framing, but also in how we would factor in the industrial step-by-step deployment of the different sources we're relying on. So we did include and integrate what seemed to us a realistic, very realistic approach to building. How fast can we reconstruct capacities? How fast can we maybe convince populations, reach the appropriate decision making for at the end being able to reach not only in 2015, I said that a net zero energy mix, but also by 2070 an energy mix that's completely optimal also as far as environmental impact is concerned, and hence more sustainable. Next slide, and we're going to go pretty fast from this point on. So I mentioned this, the deep electrification. It's two main reasons why we chose to go from what is today in France 21 to 24% of electricity in the energy mix to more than 70% in the Terrawater scenario. It's first to limit biomass use as much as possible. Biomass is not only polluting with heavy environmental and sanitary effects, but it also leads to a lot of conflicts in uses and in land use that we try to avoid as much as possible. The other reasons why we've gone to electrification is obviously because of how efficient the electricity vector is, very versatile, can be used to many different uses, is already in the habits of the population that knows and is used to deal with it and care about it. And going to electrification, which is the easiest way to go low carbon, it's also a way to save up on the number of vectors and the number of networks we can rely on. Because as you're going to see, and I'm going to come to that really quickly, we also trying to get out of everything that is gas network, transportation and distribution of gas, because when we're going to revert to biogas and hydrogen, those are going to be much harder to produce first and to transport as well. Oh, and
I just need to switch screen because on this screen they don't see very well. Just
okay. Okay, all right. I'll keep on going. I don't let myself be disturbed. Thank you very much anyway, Benjamin. So as I mentioned, electrification as a very strong push forward in our scenario, and I am losing a little bit the slide because I don't really know. Well, the next slides that are going to come, as you're going to see, are going to be, for example, that what we decided to do. Oh, here they are. Here it is. So you can see here how we made the choice of electrification and how we handled the consumption and the behaviors as far as consumption is concerned. We actually plugged in very little of sobriety and energy efficiency. Maybe the most important highlight is a reduction of 30% of heat use, essentially power energy used for heating purposes, essentially by switching to air pumps, heat pumps. I think that's how we say in English. Apologies for that. So this is the choices we made, and one very important aspect is that we chose to rebuild margins in production and in installed capacity. The scenario proposes a 10% margin, which is not only a safety margin, of course, for the French people consumption and French industry, but it's also a way to have this margin at the disposal of the rest of the European Union and the entire European central grid in case necessity calls for it. Benjamin, maybe we can go to the next slide. So this technical optimum is obviously reached by using each energy source to what it does best. So the point is not anymore to say we want a little more nuclear here, a little more renewables there. Those energy sources don't do the same things. They don't have the same physics properties. They don't bring the same benefits to the electrical grid, and hence they shouldn't be used for the same thing and intervene at the same level. So what we have here is a reorganization of the merit order of how the different energy sources intervene on the grid. So nuclear power is obviously the base load, stable, dispatchable, a deep decarbonization of the system, but is not required anymore in our model to load follow. As you know, being technically for the installations or even economically load follow of a nuclear power plant, let alone a fleet, is not the best option you can look for. So maybe we can go on this next slide and see how that optimal positioning of the different energy sources is actually materializing in real life. So you can see here again the base load of the nuclear fleet. Now how wind and solar are being used very strongly, especially at the beginning of that industrial deployment to maturity and stability of the entire system. Wind and solar are used very strongly at the beginning because we need that very important push to electrification of uses, and we need to put on the grid as much as possible low carbon electricity. This low carbon electricity is complemented in our model by hydro pump and storage. So we don't add up hydro dams, actually. We leave the hydro dams to what they are today on the French system, and also because we know the kind of impacts that global warming may have on that water availability. We add pump and storage that's much more resilient to weather conditions, can actually pass the peaks without having to resort to fossil fuels, and as a complementary benefit can absorb the extra electricity sometimes produced by wind and solar with their intermittency, avoid that it comes disturbing the electrical grid, being absorbed by pump and storage dams, and then be released back again when the demand requests it. So next slide to leave some time for the question and answer. So this is how, as far as production goes, it looks over the entire time that you can see here. You can see in red that we actually get rid of thermal fossil very quickly in 2035 from the electricity mix, and then progressively from the energy mix as the entire generation goes up. You can see how the different sources complement one another, and the only tiny bit of biomass, because I said we were going to get rid of it, not entirely. We have a little combustion of fatal biomass that will be used in case of extremes, ultra peaks. Sorry, not peaks, peaks. Next slide, Benjamin, if you please. And so what's important in this is that we do use all low carbon sources of energy, except for one. Actually, I should say that two of them are actually missing, which is the cogeneration heating that we do intend to implement on the second version of the scenarios, as well as geothermal. The potential is there. It's not so significant that it would impact the principles that we lay forward, but it deserves to be integrated, and we haven't had the chance and the occasion to do it on this first version of scenario, but we'll certainly do on the next one. Next slide, Benjamin, please. Is it moving? Nope. Okay. Well, I'll go and progress really quickly by telling you how we handle each source of energy one after the other. So as far as the nuclear fleet is concerned, so the way, as you know, the choice of the Mesmer plan in the 70s, when France wanted to compensate or at least correct its deficiency in natural resources on its territory, decided to make the nuclear choice. So France is the and so France is the demonstrator, so to speak, of how the country would manage a very high proportion of nuclear. So now the nuclear fleet is actually reached let's say, past a little bit its peak time, is starting on its second half of its life. And so it's time now and again to decide if we're going to renew this fleet and how we're going to renew it. So maybe Benjamin, try to go again to the next slide, and you're going to see how we handled nuclear right afterwards because I was actually going a little bit ahead of myself. So back to the main points of the scenario. So the primary objectives we try to achieve are sovereignty, equity, and access to energy, which also means a low price of electricity for people, and also a certain form of centralization, so we can use it as a public service and manage it and optimize it as a public service. Reducing the environmental impact, that's land use, of course, we don't talk about land use enough, pollution and natural resources consumption as far as material and metals are concerned. Capacity to reindustrialize, to take back responsibility for what we consume and to see it from close. And sovereignty. Well, we do have issues on those slides. The secondary objectives, I said, that goes with being realistic, are getting rid of all the transport and storage of hydrogen. So still resorting a lot to hydrogen for industrial decarbonization, but doing it on site, bringing the power to the industrials, have them their electrolyzers on site and be able to produce their own hydrogen when they need it. Ending the use of gas for good, and in particular distribution and transportation of gas, since we revert entirely on the most efficient electricity vector. And limit biomass, I talked about this as well. The other corollaries are the impact it has on the production means, which are revival of the nuclear industry, and that goes with it, obviously revive also research in the future nuclear sector, restart a hydro program, and the ultra peak production I talked about. Next slide. So this is the carbon intensity of the entire the result, and how the technical scenario actually translates in actual CO2 emissions. And there we can progress on the next slide and maybe go right. Okay, this is where I stopped earlier. I'm just going to go one by one, how all those principles embedded from the start actually do translate then a mean of production by mean of production. So what we're going to do here is that we're actually going to see and extend the current fleet to an average age of decommissioning of 70 years old. So you know that now the oldest plants reach their 40 years old timeline. We propose to extend that to 70 years old, which is reasonable. You know, in France, we do 10 years by 10 years, but the Americans, who have a different approach, the same kinds of plants who are the same age approximately are now being extended at 80 and sometimes 100 years old. So this fleet, we want to let it degrow progressively to avoid the cliff effect, and then be progressively compensated by a rebuilding of next generation nuclear, third and then fourth, at a rhythm that we try and that we want to be as reasonable and as progressive as possible. Obviously, we apply that realistic approach to nuclear as well. We understand that we come from a long way back. There's a lot of rebuilding to be done, also as far as competencies are concerned, people, human resources competencies, and not only industrial, and those are going to take time. So the time that this fleet recovers and actually rebuilt and even grow beyond what it is today, to a much higher installed capacity, up to 100 gigawatt entirely, we're going to need to answer the electrification, the low carbon electrification needs in the meantime. Can we go to next slide? So how are we going to answer that demand for low carbon electricity while the nuclear fleet is actually getting back on track and to its earlier speed of recovery? It's by using solar and wind that actually may be deployed much faster. But what you can see here is that wind and solar are picking up a lot of the load on the first period, but then progressively start decreasing. Why is this? It's because solar and wind do have a very important environmental footprint, consume a lot of natural resources, have a short life time, and consume a lot of land use as well. So they're not as optimal on the very long term, but they have that very important quality to be able to be deployed fast in any kind of geographies. So what we're saying here is that any country that can rely on nuclear and hydro should do so as soon as it can and as much as it can, so it can release solar and wind capacities for all the other countries that would not have reached such a point with nuclear and hydro, so they can go low carbon themselves. So here indeed, we understand perfectly well that, for example, a country, all the Eastern European countries, even a couple of the closer to us countries like Germany, like Italy or Spain, still have a lot of fossil fuels to get out of, and would need that solar and wind to be installed as fast as possible, so they can progressively get out of coal first and then gas right after it. So it is a matter of European and even world solidarity to say, when we can do nuclear and hydro, we really need to, and we really should, so that solar and wind can go decarbonize elsewhere. Obviously, keeping for ourselves all the decarbonization industrial capacities in one mean, just because it has our ideological preference, it does not make much sense when we're confronted to very global issues like climate and the environment. Next slide. So this is what maybe is one of the aspects that allows us to reach that technical optimum of the electricity mix that we propose. It's how we rely on hydro pump and storage. Actually, obviously, the Scandinavian countries, in particular Norway, has already historically been relying on this kind of installations for a long time. Switzerland as well, that just put in line important pump and storage installation. Those are very important, and in particular can support first water management in the face of the situation we're going to know more and more over the summers, but also can accommodate more intermittent power and stabilize the grid and provide lots of services to the grid that are necessary and that today do not come so easily because we haven't been used to get away from baseload production. And those are new aspects of managing an electrical grid that we only starting to learn. So I mentioned it particularly because I haven't mentioned it before, but those grid system services are very important collateral beneficial effect of that, of resorting to pump and storage. Indeed, we are pumping up, I guess we can use the expression, very much that pump and storage capacity. It is important, but what's important to say is that it is there. It is a real potential. It has been identified. There's potentially more. It is not very popular, let that be said as well. Obviously, drowning a valley is not something that either government, no industrial, no population is going to jump on very happily. But it is part of what that energy transition and that energy and transition challenges are pushing us to do. And it remains the technical optimal, including as far as environmental footprint and population impact is concerned, in comparison with alternatives. To give you an example, the other, I would say, mainstream scenario proposed by one of a governmental organization in France has a land use footprint only for its photovoltaic solar that's 3 times the land use that the pump and storage we propose has as an impact. And maybe we can see the map, Benjamin, if you manage to show it.
Yes, I have some problem because I'm regularly kicked off the.
Kicked out of the meeting. All right. Well, that allows me to say that on the website of the Voices of Nuclear, you can find the report, the synthesis of the report, and the complementary economic analysis of the scenario, and you can see all of what we're describing there as well, and get your own copy, obviously. So maybe I'll stop the presentation here since we have some technical problems, and I've been going along too long anyway, and pass on to question and answers, and pass it back to Jessica to moderate.
Yes. Thank you very much, Myrto. So just as a reminder to participants, please pose your questions in the chat and we will then raise them to Myrto, Benjamin, and of course our Director General, who is still on the call. So I have here already a first question. Basically, they're asking whether you can provide an explanation as to why electricity generation decreases from 2050 onwards.
Okay. You want or I do?
But go ahead since you started. No problem.
Well, it's not the generation. So the black line here is the total capacity, the theoretical capacity of generation. So as we have margin, all the means of production aren't running at full power at every time. All the time, so we always have some extra capacity available, and as we are switching from the renewable energies to back to nuclear after the 2050 2060 mark, there is a little decrease that is which is not which doesn't have any consequences in terms of security of the electric grid, because the surplus of power isn't generated at the same moment, or isn't necessarily usable, because you can't transfer all the power you have in excess from one time to another. So just to say that we keep our 10% margins every time, all the time, so until 2017 and beyond. So it's not well, it's a quirk of the model, if I would say so. It's not
it's not degrading the performance of the energy mix.
yeah. Obviously, if we wanted to export a lot more of power to the neighboring countries, we could just renew our renewable capacities in order to keep this capacity of production stable or increasing. That's not the choice we made here. It's a debatable choice.
But it's I mean, obviously this is first France scenario with a lot of margins to continue support, as historically the electricity fleet has done in the past to the European central grid. But we could, as Benjamin say, make a different choice and maybe increase it even further if we had. Why not?
Thank you very much. We have another question where they're asking, so your scenario does not appear to give a role to hydrogen. Can you confirm this?
So, well, I won't, because it does. It does give quite an important role to hydrogen. What we do not do is that we try to avoid transport and storage. Actually, what we call the TRL, the technological readiness level of transport and storage of hydrogen has not been so much demonstrated. It's not very high yet. We consider that forecasting massive volumes of transportation of the lightest of all molecules is not something very credible for the near future, or at least we're not sure we may be able to achieve the targets. And I would go as far as saying even the ones, and maybe in particular the ones that the European Commission is putting forward. I think as an engineer and a lot of scientists are quite cautious on confirming or backing up the hypothesis that the politicians are putting forward today as far as hydrogen is concerned. That doesn't mean that using hydrogen as a decarbonation vector is not a good idea. It is a good idea for industrial purposes. It is a very good idea for a lot of stationary uses of hydrogen, especially where electricity cannot do the job. So what we're trying to do is bring electricity to the electrolyzers where low carbon hydrogen can be produced by the industrials as they need it. So there is a very important use of hydrogen. What we're trying to avoid is transportation and storage.
Thank
And
you.
in this scenario, we actually factor in important reindustrialization. So the capacity to provide low carbon, base load, very regular at a very foreseeable price in the long term power. It's something that's very important for the industrials to revert, for the industry to revert to power, and for an economical, or at least an economical production of hydrogen is very important as well. So the quality of the power, in addition to the availability of the power, is something that we need to be cautious about.
Thank you, Myrto. And indeed, I mean, it seems that at the moment, every member state seems to have a different answer to the same challenges which we're all facing. How do you see energy cooperation and integration amongst the different EU countries?
So that's an excellent question. Obviously, it was not the first target of our scenario to do it at a European-wide level, but it is something that we have to take into account, and we don't plan on doing otherwise. Historically, the French fleet, in particular the French nuclear fleet, has been a stabilizing force of the European central grid. It also has contributed to lower its carbon footprint by 30% overall, which is very important. The approach we've had was to say that solidarity does not always mean be the potential recipient of the solidarity of others. We don't put ourselves in the situation where we plan on receiving and be the beneficiaries of extra power from the other countries. We consider that solidarity is being able to propose margins and to propose a supply security to other countries when they need it. So the way we've approaching our integration into the European grid was to say, well, let's make the extra effort to have additional margins, important margins of low carbon electricity, and be able to come to the support, maybe to the rescue of other countries when they need it in times of stress, of power and energy stress when it is required. So it's a very simple approach, but one may say that it's the historical approach that all countries really have had, was to say, let's have a production forecast and production capacities higher up than what we imagine will be the peak demand. And this is how we make sure that everyone will be served and that we can propose an equity of in access to power to the different countries, but most and foremost to the populations, whoever they are. Let's not make electricity and power something that can be played out on the market, and that price can become an issue for people accessing this, the most strategic of all, I think we should say, commodity that can be imagined.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, access to affordable energy is a very important point for both citizens and for businesses. Maybe this leads quite well into our next question. So what are about the economic and financial aspects? So is this scenario optimized compared to other scenarios that are out there from that perspective?
So it is it wasn't the first principle we put forward when we actually designed and built the scenario, but trying to be as low tech as possible, resorting to very mature technologies on the sovereign technologies, trying to reduce the number of distribution networks, getting rid of gas, for example, using pump and storage instead of batteries, for example, or even power to gas to power. All those choices that we made were actually quite reasonable economically speaking. So at the end, what we did, and you can find that on the website as well, there is a little economic appendix that goes with the scenario where we try to outline the big trends up and down that would actually impact economically the scenario. What we find is that if we take, for example, as I said again, the French governmental scenario, that's the most sought after today, which for those of you who knows is the RTE N03 scenarios. I'm sorry for the technicalities for everyone else. We're slightly above the prices that they forecast. To tell you exactly, they are at 98 euros per megawatt hour, and we are at 103. So, you know, like it's 5 euros per megawatt hour difference between those two scenarios, while we have that 10% margin, why it's all sovereign, and it's robust and reliable. And the value and the price of that, or should I say the cost of that electricity system is actually comes back to France and to French people and to French economy, since it's mostly sovereign and based on sovereign technologies and installations.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I mean economics, you know, just take the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital, change it 1%, and everything explodes inside. So that allows me to say that what Yves de Bazay said at the beginning is really what matters most, which is a level playing field for all energy sources. And then we can have an actual vision of what's economic and what's not, and what's optimal and what's not. So level playing field, yes, definitely.
Thanks. And you mentioned in there, so you made reference to mature technologies, and we have another question there, and that's perhaps something that Yves may want to also intervene on. I mean, somebody's obviously asking the question, you know, it's going to require an increase in nuclear capacity. So in terms of the deployment of the new nuclear, what will it look like? Are we talking fission? Are we talking fusion? Are we talking large reactors, small reactors, advanced modular reactors? You know, what are we looking at?
So I'm going to make a short answer as far as the scenario Terrawater is concerned, and then indeed pass it on to Yves, who obviously is more suited to answer. What we've done is that we decided it was not our role actually to make this kind of forecast. What we could definitely say is that there will be nuclear technologies, plural, available. There should be. That those are probably some of the most mature or most likely available industrially at that time, forecasted time in the future, and that there will be needed to have a sequence of different generations coming one after the other. You know, there's no point in being stuck in one and not progressing to the other. But we weren't really in a capacity to say which one would take the lead. So we left it kind of open and just provided a chunk of what portion of electricity should come from nuclear generation, because we're interested by the physics properties that nuclear can provide as compared to other energy sources, and kind of left the floor open to that kind of detail. And then floor to you, Yves, indeed.
I don't know if Yves can. I think Yves. I think he may have problems with his connection at the moment.
All right. Well, then
so maybe
I'll
whilst
say...
yeah, I mean, maybe we can move on to another question then in the meantime. And somebody's actually asking, have you taken into account the huge potential for geothermal energy for the heating of housings and the houses and buildings as part of your scenario?
So I kind of hinted to that earlier. Unfortunately, not yet. We have identified it. Yes, of course. We have actually put a slight short disclaimer in the report saying that it is part of the program for the V2 of the scenario Terrawater, hopefully next year. But we haven't yet. No. The short answer is not yet, but it's very clearly identified, and we look forward actually to tackle that that very important aspect. What I said also is that at least on the French territory, our hypothesis today is that it's not going to be so significant that it's going to change very importantly the principles that we actually laid out. It's going to contribute a lot, maybe decrease the amount, for example, of wind and solar we need in the first period, so we can free up wind and solar capacities for other countries faster. But as far as the big dynamics and the big trends are concerned, it shouldn't challenge the overall balance and equilibrium.
And I should add that in the moreover, with the geothermal potential that we still have to assess, there is also the cogeneration potential of the nuclear power plant. And the fact is that in metropolitan France, geothermal and the nuclear cogeneration are direct concurrent and competitors, because they provide low temperature heat of between 50 and 100 degrees that is nearly just usable for space heating. And so it will be there will be a big competition between geothermal energy and nuclear cogeneration to provide heat to heat networks in big metropolitan areas, only because that's the only areas where those technologies can where the density of heat needed can overcome the huge capital cost that you need in order to install all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. And I'll give you one more minute just to ask you one final question. Can you just quickly say what the reaction of policymakers has been to your scenario?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, actually, it's well, that's a good question. First of all, it was obviously a little challenging at the beginning, since the very first principle that we laid out was to say, well, we've done these scenarios for ourselves because we didn't believe that the scenarios you would actually put forward had, a certain chance to occur. The hypothesis that we're taking were too many bets. So of course we were challenging the scenarios that were already there in the debate when we brought our own. But I must say that since then there's been a lot of cross-referencing, and it's been used to challenge a lot of hypotheses. I think there's also some recognition of the fact that we're opening some doors for example, the hydro pump and storage had been completely ignored by all the other modeling scenarios on the market, so to say. We're taking some very bold steps, like, for example, getting rid of transport and distribution of biogas and hydrogen. And so that sparks conversation. The fact that what we're looking for is not to privilege one low carbon energy to another, but rather really use each one of them to what they do best and reach a technical optimum from which the politicians and the society at large can make their own decisions, knowing where they start from and how much it would cost to deviate from that technical optimum, is actually bringing some additional trends of conversations that are interesting. So we've had a lot of enthusiasm from industry that wants to decarbonize and was waiting for the right conditions to do so as competitively as possible. A lot of enthusiasm from citizens as well that were looking for scenarios that didn't carry the dogmas that maybe the politics are kind of stranded with, and and more appetite from institutions and the government as well, that finds it a nice and worthy addition to the debate. So we haven't done it for that, but we're really happy that's the result it brings. And right now we're starting to answer solicitations from outside of France, as I mentioned. Thank you to Nucleareurope, but also IAA is coming along and so on. So yeah, that's very promising.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you for this very interesting presentation. And thank you also to all of you who joined us for this webinar. We will make the recording available after the event, together with a link to the report in both French, and I understand the English version is now also available, and the slides as well, so that you have everything. And we'll also provide you with their contact details, and as I know we were not able to answer all the questions raised today. So thank you very much, everyone, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for your participation.
Bye.